Backlash in America, as I mentioned there, Donald Trump. Gaby, how's he still clinging on? Do you think he will actually make the election in November? I mean, serious allegations.
It's amazing. I mean, this story, the thing about this story is just both shocking, profoundly shocking, because you've got here someone who wants to be president basically saying, woohoo, I committed an indecent assault and I can get away with it. But also really unsurprising. This doesn't tell us anything about Trump, really, that we couldn't already have guessed. And you think if he's made it this far in the campaign, based on what we know about him, I don't think this is going to stop him. And yet the half of your brain is saying he can't carry on after this. And the other half is saying, well, what else is going to happen? I mean, the only thing that could realistically happen at this time is Mike Pence steps in instead of him as the candidate. But
yeah, well, whether there are procedures in place for that, I mean, we're in unknown territory. But Ian, you know, it does seem that he's getting pretty close to having to withdraw. If something else like this comes out, one thinks.
I'm not so sure. I tend to presume that he's judged by a different standard to the way that any other politician is. Of course, any other politician would have to step down. It would be impossible for them to continue. But he is more akin to a comedian, really, than he is a politician. They like the tone of the way he talks, that no-nonsense approach.
And he keeps referring to the reality show, to The Apprentice, doesn't he?
Absolutely. Well, and if you think about the way that he addressed the Fox News anchor when she supposedly gave him tough questioning, exactly, and suddenly he starts talking about menstruation and issues like that, he doesn't suffer any ill effect from that. He's quite clearly this monstrous misogynist. That hasn't stopped him so far, so I just don't see why this further step down that road would be any different to what's come before.
And Martin, the idea, you know, all these senior Republicans, those that were left supporting him, even those disappearing, John McCain, Arnold Schwarzenegger, others as well.
Yeah, well, he's being abandoned left, right and centre from Republicans now. It is really important what Mike Pence does, but it's also interesting to see how our politicians are reacting to it. So this morning you've had Michael Fallon, the Defence Secretary, saying, I don't want to get involved in American politics, and Justine Greening, the Education Secretary, saying these are crass comments, which of course anyone normal onlooker would agree with.
And so it all sets it up, Gaby, for the debate this evening. My goodness me, is he going to take it on the chin and say, I'm a sinner that repenteth, or attack Hillary Clinton over her husband?
Well, he's already sort of half apologised in a sort of, you know, fantastic Trump apology where he basically says, that's not the real me. Apparently the real me is the one when the cameras are rolling, and the one caught off camera is not the real me.
Well, I remember after the last debate, he complained about a dodgy microphone.
Exactly.
There was one that
I think
working.
he'll go after Bill. He'll just say, you know, well, your husband, you know, doesn't exactly have the world's best track record with women, which might work if Bill Clinton was actually the candidate, but he's not. And I presume he'll just try and bluster it out. But I think he'll be talking to that bit of the audience, the Trump audience, that doesn't care who he is, that just likes the ideas, that knows that no one else is going to come along in American politics saying quite the same things. And therefore, if that's what they want, if they want, you know, to bar every Muslim from America and build a wall with Mexico, then he's the only choice.
I mean, but do you think that's enough, Michael, to get him over the line? You know, we talk about, OK, there's the committed Trumpites, the committed Republicans who will vote for him come whatever, but you know, you've got to attract some of the swing voters, haven't you?
Yeah, I think what the problem for him here really is there's a big section of American voters who are very conservative, and it might be the vulgarity rather than the misogyny that actually sinks him here.
The morality as well. I mean, you're talking Bible Belt support here, aren't they? They're going to say, well, you know, this isn't the kind of thing we want to hear.
That'll be a problem for him, and it looks currently as if it's so much of a problem that he won't succeed. However, what we see in Britain, what we see actually in Scotland as well, what we see throughout Europe and in America, are a core set of voters who want to kick the status quo. No matter what you present to them as a significant change from the way the system operates now, they will go for that. That's the vote that he's operating towards. It looks like he's alienated enough people that even that vote may not be enough to get him over the line. But that key anti-establishment, anti-elite vote, I still think that he will hoover it up.
Well, stay with that thought and apply it to the United Kingdom and what we heard in particular last week from Theresa May and indeed other senior government figures. She's trying to capture that vote, yet having been part of that political establishment herself for many, many years.
It's the most extraordinary sight that you always see when you see a Prime Minister stand up and say, well, I'm taking on the elites. And you sort of think, well, this is baffling even on its own terms. She'd been Home Secretary for 6 years before it, so there's only so far she can go with that. However, I suspect that some of the policies she was putting forward, much as I disagree with them, on immigration and on that sort of idea around the market of being able to interfere in the market, will actually appeal to many working class voters who might have been previously would have voted Labour, might have been toying with voting UKIP. So there is more policy meat on the bones of that message, but still it's innately absurd for a politician to be making it.
But, I mean, we've got this idea, Michael, that, you know, Steve Hilton, former advisor to David Cameron, saying today, and he was of course a prominent Leave campaigner, saying some of these policies are repugnant.
Yeah, you've got an interesting situation here where Theresa May, formerly in the Home Office, has put immigration right at the centre of this Brexit debate. And there's a sort of strange retreat for liberal Britain in a way. Where are the sort of liberal voices in the cabinet, in the government, in the opposition, who are really going to make the arguments that the economy should come first? Is it going to be Philip Hammond? He was out in Washington the day after the Prime Minister's speech, making the point that we shouldn't be too hasty about what this means. You know, the liberal voice for Britain now is a really interesting one. Where is it going to come from?
Yeah, well, we're hearing that they've gone underground, Gaby, that, you know, the Chancellor might be one of them. And one thinks about the Home Secretary herself, who made some of those statements. Now, I remember her in the campaign debates when, you know, she had a great zinger, didn't she, on Boris Johnson about the kind of guy you'd like to go to a party with, but you wouldn't want him to drive you home.
I was watching Nicky Morgan on your programme earlier, and, you know, she was very much saying, it's not the Amber I know, this is not, and you look at Amber and think, come on, this is not your policy, it's been dumped on you from above, the idea of getting companies to publish data on how many foreign workers they have. And there are interestingly signs this morning they're rowing back on that. It looks like government is now saying, oh, well, we won't force people to publish the information, because obviously business has been saying to them, you know, we don't want a brick through our windows because someone objects to the number of Romanians we've been hiring. You know, so I think we're now going to end up in a situation where they quietly retreat from that idea, and it just never happens.
But it also seems, I mean, throwing it across the English Channel, and I mean, it also seems to be upsetting the Europeans. You know, the pushback we're getting from the likes of President Hollande and indeed the Chancellor Angela Merkel. You know, saying things like, you know, you can't even start negotiating with us with those kind of ideas.
And Hollande's comments, some people suspect, are actually what triggered that precipitous drop in the pound immediately after he made them. There's no overstating just how alienated European leaders are by the way that we're talking about these issues. It's not just the deterioration of our standards when we start talking about immigration. It's that we don't seem to have any comprehension of what is involved in a European negotiation. We have Brexit ministers that still talk as if they're entitled to bilateral trade deals with European member states, which they are not entitled to. And then we have an attitude that sort of says, well, it's equivalent saying, well, look, I'm going to go to Prague, but I refuse to follow any of the rules. If we're saying we want to be in the single market, but we're going to put whatever we want on our own products and we're going to cut freedom of movement and not respond to the European Central Bank, then they're obviously not going to take us
So much swirling round, but I mean, throw into that then, Michael, the idea that the Brexit vote was in part about reasserting the sovereignty of Parliament, but then as many of my guests pointing out to me this morning and reading in the newspaper saying, well, hold on, none of this seems to be going before Parliament for a vote.
Yeah, well, I'll make one prediction, which is always dangerous in politics. The skullduggery in Parliament on Brexit has not even begun. It will go on month after month. They'll find ways of having votes over just about everything. You know, it's going to be fun times on the green benches, I think, because you're going to get people manufacturing votes about all the issues they're worried about. It's going to be interesting.
What, picking it apart. And what about this? I mentioned the Chancellor, Gaby, you know, reading in the papers today, unnamed minister saying he's got to watch his back.
Yes, there's been a bit of briefing from the Treasury about the three Brexit ministers, Davis, Fox and Johnson, so I leave you to guess who might have it in for Philip Hammond. But there are clearly tensions there, you know, because the Chancellor is the person who is constantly dealing with the city and with business, which is terrified, you know, what the implications for Brexit are. And he's always going to be kind of fighting their corner in cabinet. So there's going to be a little bit of tension there between the two. But you can really see the relationship between Philip Hammond and Theresa May emerging as, you know, we've been here before, tensions between a Chancellor and Prime Minister. But that's the key relationship for this Parliament, I think.
I wonder when. Ian, did you want to come in on that?
I mean, there is this sort of element where he comes out and he says the precise opposite of what Theresa May was saying in her speech. When he was talking to Bloomberg the next day, he says, what comes first, immigration or nothing? Obviously, single market membership comes before immigration. You couldn't get further away from what she's saying. When he talks to the guys in the city, as soon as she makes that speech, the Monday morning afterwards, they start thinking, what are the processes that we start transferring to Europe in order that we can demonstrate to local regulators we have a significant enough presence that we can maintain passporting? So the city was already changing. He's trying to reflect that reality. And the more he does that, I think the more untenable his position becomes, because ultimately he's clearly not on the same page as Downing Street.
What's so interesting is in that 6 years of the Cameron government, Cameron and Osborne, you could barely get a cigarette paper between the two of them, and goodness knows people tried. Absolutely. And this is very dangerous. You've got the Treasury pulling in a different direction from Downing Street, it seems already.
So Blair Brown is what you're saying, Gaby.
Except, I mean, to some extent, maybe they need to play good cop, bad cop. Yeah. Maybe the Prime Minister needs to talk to those people who voted for Brexit wanting an end to immigration, and maybe Hammond needs to talk to, you know, to old Tory friends in the city. But that's a that's a very hard act to pull off when you're essentially talking, at cross purposes with each other.
It's interesting, isn't it, that we have nearly used up all our time on that issue, but we've got to talk about Labour and, are they now in a better position in terms of offering a credible opposition? Of course, those who remained on and who were appointed to Jeremy Corbyn's front bench saying, yes, we are. But then we're also hearing, Michael, about some kind of shadow cabinet, freelance operation within the Parliamentary Labour Party.
Well, so it depends how formalised this is, but certainly you're going to get Labour moderates, as they style themselves, in Parliament taking different positions to Jeremy Corbyn. You might also get differences on policy, developing their own policy through think tanks and other devices. I think what you can say is, even though Jeremy Corbyn has won twice, unity has not amazingly broken out in the Labour Party.
That's a stunning observation there, Michael. I mean, Ian, what do you think? We got Alan Johnson saying the other day, a senior figure like Alan Johnson saying Corbyn just isn't up to it.
No, I mean, he demonstrably isn't. I mean, it's quite clear that he has no very clear idea of what policy platform he would have, nor any idea of how to speak to the public. However, there were some little diamonds in the rough of that reshuffle. The first one, I think, is that there is actually, a vaguely competent shadow Brexit minister now. So we're actually going to start seeing, hopefully...
Sir Keir Starmer.
Exactly, yeah, from Director of Public Prosecutions, who actually has a forensic mind, who will take a structured approach to what's going on with Brexit, quite unlike Emily Thornberry, who really didn't seem to understand anything that she was doing. She was being briefed weeks after the vote and still asking, what is Article 50 and how does it work? She clearly just couldn't get to grips with it. Now it looks like, at least on Brexit, there's going to be a more structured approach to the way that Labour does opposition.
But I mean, on that issue of Brexit, obviously, one of the big existential issues for the next years to come, do they agree? The point is Jeremy Corbyn really a Remainer? Was he a Remainer at heart? What does he want?
Well, that's a multi-billion-dollar question. The other question is whether, because people suspect him of being a secret leaver, the rest is whether, if you have a situation where it's very difficult to get Brexit through Parliament, you don't know where the Labour Party is, because Corbyn can't really lead the Labour Party in any particular direction. There'll always be a load of MPs who are going in the opposite direction to him. It becomes much harder for government to do the maths. But I think something happened with this reshuffle it's a generational shift that didn't happen last year. This is about saying, OK, literally the whole of all the Labour people you probably know, people you'd recognise, could pick out of a lineup, they're all over. We are into a whole new era where really it is closest to Corbyn that counts. The people who are prepared to serve have gone, and it will be whether some new sort of star emerges from that era and whether there are tensions between those new rising stars.
But I can also see I can hear it in my head. The first Prime Minister's questions of the new session coming up, because the core members of the Labour front bench, all from a very small area of London. As Theresa May's already called them the Liberal elite.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And there's this worry that the Jeremy Corbyn Labour Party does just represent a corner of Islington, and that's a problem he's going to have to
and a bit of Hackney.
Well, absolutely. To be fair, it stretches across North London.
Listen, we're out of time, Michael, Ian, Gaby. Very good to see you. Thank you very much indeed for taking us through some of those bigger issues